Okay. We now come to chapter 10 in our metaphysics course, the ultimate cause of all things. This is known as natural theology. And what I've done is from page 81 to 92, I've given you out the first set of notes. There'll be quite a lot more to come, believe me. But do not be deterred by the technicality of some of the work I've put down here. I will make it as easy as it can be presented, believe me. If you could see Father Woodbury had a doctorate in sacred theology, doctorate in philosophy, and he should have got a doctorate in canon law. That's neither here nor there. But the man was a great teacher, profound teacher, following his master Garrigou-Lagrange. Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange was about the beginning of the 20th century. These were great men. I have a great lot of his works. If anybody would like to borrow one, they'd be very welcome, if you can read Latin, or French, or English. In all three languages. Now, the ultimate cause of all things. You see, no nation, no race of people have ever been lacking in this subject. They've all known in some way, I shouldn't say the subject or this knowledge, they've all known that there is something out there. The Australian Aborigines would speak about the dream time and the spirit, and the North American Indians and others all have some concept, and sometimes it would lead them to barbaric practices like the people, the original inhabitants of Mexico, when they would tear the heart out of the Spaniards they captured and their own maidens. It horrified an American friend of mine when he was listening to cricket in Australia, and he heard the announcer say, "This man has just bowled a maiden over." What that means is he bowled 8 balls, but nobody scored off it, so they called it a maiden over. But the ultimate cause is known under different aspects. It was thought that the people of Terra del Fuego did not have a concept of a god. But it turned out that the people had such respect for their god that they would not talk to the strangers, these white invaders coming into the country. They wouldn't talk to them about it. They said it's a very personal matter. I can remember, and I've mentioned this in class before, I think, that the first time I met it was in Ottawa. A Jewish girl would write that. G-D. So much respect for the name of God that they will not write, the Jewish people will not write the full name, God. The word God comes from originally from an Anglo-Saxon origin, and means the one to whom we make sacrifices. Gott ist mit uns, as the Germans would say. God is with us. But then you'd have the Greek Latin people. They have Deus, which comes from dies, which is day in Latin, and they would have it as Deus, the shiny one, the one that's like the daylight, bright and brilliant and shiny. So this name, God, was more we pay homage to him. This one is, he's brilliant like the daylight. I've often been asked, as I said here in the notes, do I believe in God? I've never forgotten the 2 men from Montreal one day in Ottawa were talking to me. Do you believe in God? I said, no. And the young woman who transported me there asked me would I like to meet these people. I said yes, and lovely afternoon. And they asked me where I came from, and I said from Australia. And it's wonderful to be in Asia and the East and the islands particularly, as long as you don't get yours, which is a tropical disease, YAWS. So one of them says, what's yours? I said, oh, mine's a whiskey, thanks, it's very nice of you. So one of them said, do you believe in God? And I said, no. And Iris said, she looked at me quickly, she knew better than that. And I said, I don't believe in him, I know he exists. I'm so utterly certain that he exists that I think I'm more sure of that than I am that you're sitting there. which startled them. Now, for the next hour, I couldn't get through to them. But this is another question, not the same question. How can you believe in a God when a little child is born crippled? By the way, I don't think they gave a damn about the little child born crippled. Like lots of people who raise that kind of problem. They don't give, they don't care. They're just setting it up as an objection, a theoretical objection. I said, but that's a separate question. The goodness of God and the existence of God are two questions. As the ancients used to say, aliud et aliud, other and other. Separate questions. So, I'm more certain that there's a God than that you are sitting in front of me now. Not everybody can study philosophical proofs. So that's why the good Lord gave us 10 commandments. St. Thomas brings this out in the very first question of his great Summa. By the way, if I was ever stranded on an island, nothing else to be with me, even ice cream and whiskey, not even that, I would choose the Summa of Theology. Woodbury said he'd spend, if he was a young man, he'd spend his whole life studying the Summa and Cajetan's commentary on the Summa. Cajetan was one of the great commentators. Banyes is another, whoops, it's supposed to be an N, with another commentator. John of St. Thomas, another commentator. Who I left out? Ferrari, isn't it? Who? Sylvester. Sylvester, yes. And Ferrari. I was shocked to hear, as Father Woodbury was, when young Leo Ferrari at the Academy once said, which one of these would I be like? Somebody said, none of them. Anyway, these men, these great commentators, he would spend his life with St. Thomas and Cajetan. My friend, Father, I've forgotten his name for the moment, Reginald Batten, said he'd stay like Banyes. John of St. Thomas wrote, based upon St. Thomas's, wrote a course of theology and a course of philosophy. I have the course of theology, but I haven't got the course of philosophy. Anyway, not everybody can study philosophical proofs. That is why St. Thomas says in the very first question, I think about, there are 10 articles, I think about Article 2, something like that. God revealed certain things that man can discover for himself because they can't all be philosophers. But they need to know these things for their eternal happiness. I thought at some time we might have a little course on the first 2 or 3 questions of the Summa. They lay out all, for instance, in the first question about what a science is, and etc., etc. Very interesting. So, people have a sort of a confused knowledge. Not a clear knowledge necessarily, but some confused knowledge of a God. I remember 2 young women asking me on one occasion, what is your idea of a God? An old man sitting up in a cloud with a white beard? I said, well, if I was about 5 years of age, that would be my concept. But certainly not my concept now. And some people have asked, what is St. Thomas? That's what we call anthropomorphic idea. Man-shaped. Anthropos, like anthropology, anthropos means man. Morph means shape. So it's anthropology, anthropomorphism means God's just, we visualize him like a man sitting up in a cloud and sort of saying, gee, I wonder how I can make things difficult for them down there. And the ancient peoples often gave him spiteful intentions and angers and also loves and all sorts of things. A very confused, primitive notion of God. Some have claimed, theologians and philosophers, I think Certitude was one that wrote on this particularly, that it is impossible, a practical impossibility, to be an atheist, a true atheist. We have a confused knowledge of this. We're dependent upon some being. Like the fellow who said, thank God I'm an atheist. But right at the beginning, we should make some distinctions in order to clarify some points. Proof that there is a God and not based on the Bible. I mentioned to some young man on one occasion that you can prove with utter certitude that the God exists. He said, but I don't believe in the Bible. I said, what the hell has that got to do with it? The Bible presupposes that there's a God. The study of God's existence is not religion. Religion is a relationship between man and God, paying homage to him, etc. So, that is not, in fact, the very word religion. Like lig, re and lig. Re means back or again, it has several meanings. Back, a bond, back. Like ligament is a bond. A bond back with God. That's what religion is. That word is more abused than probably any other word in the English language today. A past astronomer royal was quoted to me on one occasion against me. There is no God, he says. I said I wouldn't care whether he said there is a God. He's still wrong. He's outside his field. His whole knowledge depends upon observation, and you cannot observe God. Same as the surgeon who once said to me, I've operated on many people and never discovered a soul yet. I said, I'd be surprised if you said you did discover a soul. So I've always said that a psychologist who says there's no soul, he's wrong. If he says there is a soul, he's still wrong as a psychologist. It's out of his field. Because experimental or empirical psychology, which I've had to study both, philosophical and empirical psychology, empirical psychology depends upon observation, and observation only. And if you read one psychology book, you read another, you wonder if it's the same subject you're reading about. There's a natural inclination to have a confused knowledge that there is a God. Now, a common one today is Bishop Paley's argument. And a certain priest friend of mine, who's a professor of theology, moral theology, was on a certain television station and told me he's going to deal with this on this station. I think you all can guess which station it is. Yeah. He's going to tell them about the stars and the beautiful, the sun and the moon and all this brilliant creation, how, the proof that there's a God from that. That's Bishop Paley's argument, P-A-L-E-Y, and is very famous for being utterly wrong. It's not so much that it's wrong as, how can I put it? It's mistaken as an idea of proving. You cannot prove God's existence from that. The philosophers would say it's non-apodictic. You cannot prove God's existence from design. Dr. Bonnet's had to deal with that extensively in recent times. So it's what we call a suasive argument. You could gaze in wonderment and say there must be a God for all this, but you cannot set down a scientific proof for it, except vague general idea that yes, he's great. My God, it brings out the greatness of God. For instance, supposing you're standing on beaches that I've stood on in Australia, beautiful golden sand, 7-mile beach. Would you like to have the job of counting how many grains of sand there are in this? Some of them are big, broad beaches going on for 7 miles, 9-mile beach. This sort of beach on the coast. There are 34 beaches in Sydney alone. Some of them admittedly about 100 yards or so. But then there are other big, broad beaches, Bronte, Bondi, Coogee, all these places, big, broad beaches. But the grains of sand, billions and billions and billions and billions and billions. And one intellect controls the lot. One intellect controls it by giving it an existence and its modes of operation. So, we're jumping ahead by talking about this. Now, an attempt to prove the existence of God was made by St. Anselm. This is called the ontological argument.
Excuse me 1 minute. Could you go back to Paley for a minute?
Yes, certainly.
Wasn't Paley the one who gave the argument of finding like a watch or something on the beach?
Yep.
Why would that not be a substantial argument of, finding something scattered as opposed to put together?
because it's not a proper effect. I could have put it there. It's not a proper effect. You'll see when we come to the proofs.
Okay, thank you.
It's not a sufficient effect. Yes, it's nice and persuasive, and it's nice to explain to little children. I was, my late teens, early 20s, I was teaching catechetics to little children on Sunday from state schools with other people. And I can remember this argument being brought up. Could God make a stone too big for himself to lift? And I heard confused people groping and groping and groping. The question's absurd. It's a silly question in the first place. Somebody who was at this class and is no longer here was upset because I said, I've had two people very upset who were in this class. The first one said, was Jesus an animal? I said, well, he's got animal nature, the same as we have. And in fact, I think that's de fide. He had human nature. You can't back out that one. So they go away and told Patricia, she met them, told her that I said Jesus was a dog. I got so exasperated in the class to talk about, was man an animal? They're arguing with me, these two fellows. And they'd only been to the class 10 minutes. They'd never been there before. Finally I said, haven't you ever had a pea, my friend? Of course man's an animal, got animal nature. I couldn't resist it. Now the next one, what was the other one again? Oh yes. I think it's appropriate that I say it here. These women came to this class 1 or 2 nights and heard me say that God didn't have potency. Without attempting to find out what I said, she thought I criticized God and she will not come to this class anymore. Whew, thank goodness. With that kind of mind, I don't want them in the class. I'm sorry, you have a question.
Clarify one thing. Are you saying intelligent design is invalid per se? Are you saying it is invalid in proving the existence of God?
Exactly, the last one, yes.
Second part.
Yes. You can't conclude from it adequately. But you'll see the precision when we get to the real proofs, you see. And I'll show you where that comes into in the fifth way from finality. I'll show you that too when we come to it. So then, we're going to go through all 5 ways, by the way. And they're so beautiful and clear that you wonder why others don't see them. We've looked, Dr. Bonnet and I have seen books. When we were at the university, we used to have books sent to us all the time. Some of them don't not at the university and get books sent to them. I've got to find out his trick, his method. But anyway, we received books, introductory books for philosophy for students, and they'd set out an argument which St. Thomas sets out. Pardon me. Completely misunderstanding what he said and leaving out most of it. Setting it out incorrectly. I might try and, if I get time, to dig out some of these. After we've done with the proofs, then you make a comparison for yourselves. So St. Anselm made a proof, made a very difficult proof. And I've set down, St. Anselm wrote 2 works. He is called by one historian as the ultimate rational philosopher. He reduced everything to rationality. St. Anselm was an excellent mind. He lived 10 something?
1053 to 1109.
To 1109, yes. And he put forward what's known as the ontological argument. And lots of philosophers since have taken that up. In fact, I have a book with just the ontological argument, and the philosophers have done it. Descartes was one, for instance. St. Anselm's argument, he wrote first of all a book called the Monologion, which he set out, if you want to get your head in a swim, try reading it before you go to bed to sleep. You won't sleep all night if you read it. It's so difficult. When I taught medieval philosophy at Naval University, I had to even drop most of it and just read a part that we're going to read now. It's so difficult for the students. They'd say, wow, he was a powerful thinker. Then he wrote another one called the Proslogion. Now this is just a small book. And in that, he summarised the argument. And I've given it to you here. I'm going to put his argument on the board in a simplified fashion. Think of the greatest thing you could possibly think of. Nothing's greater. Absolutely the greatest. Perfect in every way. We'll call it P for perfect. The most perfect idea, infinitely greater than anything you can think of. There's only one thing greater than it. Give it be. Give it existence. Therefore it must exist. So what you've got is the greatest thing that can exist, and yet there's something greater than it. So this is insufficient. With the be, it exists. Let's read his own words. That's the best way. If I got it out of the monologion, your heads would be in a spin. He goes on again and again, and he's disputing with another. Was it Gonilon? Was it? Yes, Gonilon. He disputed with another, and boy, you read this going backwards and forwards. I might try and show you just some of that sometime. First of all, St. Anselm says, now certainly that than which a greater cannot be thought cannot exist in the intellect only. For if it exists only in the intellect, it can be thought that exists also in reality, which is greater. If therefore that than which a greater cannot be thought exists only in the intellect, that very thing than which a greater cannot be thought is something than which a greater can be thought. But certainly this cannot be. Hence, beyond doubt, there is something than which a greater cannot be thought, both in the intellect and in reality. That's from the Proslogion, which is a shorter version of all his other stuff. Takes a little thinking. You can't think of anything greater than it. But yet, you can think of something greater than it, the same thing existing. Therefore, he concludes that this must exist. St. Thomas deals with it. And here's St. Thomas' words there. He says, perhaps not everyone who hears this name God understands it to signify something than which nothing greater can be thought. Seeing that some have believed God to be a body, lots of people won't acknowledge that as God. Like the couple of pharmacists I was talking on occasion, do I think that God is something sitting up in a cloud with a big white beard? Nevertheless, it does not therefore follow that he understands that what the name signifies exists actually, but only that it exists mentally. In other words, no matter what you take, it's only an idea. That's what St. Thomas is saying. Nor can it be argued that it actually exists, unless it be admitted that there actually exists something than which nothing greater can be thought. And this precisely is not admitted by those who hold that God does not exist. You notice the reference there. One means the first part of the summa. Remember last week, I think it was, I showed you these? One means the first part, the prima pars, as it's called in Latin, the first part. Question 2, article 2. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped a bit. No. First part, question 2, article 1, add 2. Add always means a reply to the objection. He's replying to objections there. Some have said that you can prove the existence of God through just simple contemplation. Some have argued that St. Anselm didn't want this to be a proof of the existence of God, but as a means of contemplation of the greatness of God. Some monks have argued that way. But if that is so, you cannot then account for all the reasoning that goes on between Gonilon and St. Anselm. I can tell you, I've looked at that and your head's in a swim. Those men were taught to think. You see, in those days, the Middle Ages, they up to the age of 16, they studied nothing more, and this is all in Latin, by the way, they just presumed Latin, than, what was it? Logic, rhetoric, and grammar. Logic so that you can reason well, rhetoric so you can express yourself with good argumentation, and grammar so you can express yourself accurately. Up to 16, that's all they knew. But at 17, they were launched into great studies. And it's interesting to note that I think it was Bertrand Russell and C.E.M. Joad. I think it was Bertrand Russell said to Joad, wrote something to him and said about He picked this Summa of Thomas Aquinas up in the library recently, and he said he was quite amazed. He said it's quite an advanced book. He said only for scholars, of course, but he'd never read the prologue. It was written for beginners in the Middle Ages. And if you want to get some reasoning, remember, you read Cajetan, and you read what students had to read in the Middle Age in Latin. Cajetan is so difficult that they say he's explaining St. Thomas, that you've got to read St. Thomas to understand Cajetan. Which is quite a joke, of course. So do you grasp the meaning of this? I should have put some more underlining in that text. I think it would have helped a bit. In one text, it's got greater than, what is it again? Nothing greater can be thought. That's hyphenated everywhere, so you can get the thought together better. But you've got something which is utterly perfect. Yet something greater than can be, even though we think it's great. It has existence. But the two together must exist, therefore, he concludes. But St. Thomas pointed out, you haven't got out of the mind. You're still in the mind. It's thought to exist. Doesn't make it actually exist. Yet some modern philosophers, I have a book at home with the ontological argument and modern philosophers, and in that, the number of philosophers that have thought this, that thought from an idea of a God, you can leap into the existence of God. Descartes is the prime one. Yep. But Leibniz, yes, and Descartes. Yep. And the Spinoza was a Spanish Jew, had to take refuge in Holland. And his textbook of ethics almost reads like a geometry book. All woe now out of the mind. Not the practical down-to-earth stuff which is written by St. Thomas in ethics. He knows what men are capable of doing. But these men think that they can sit in a drawing room like Kant and never go far more than 5 miles from his home, and yet can portray to us what the whole world is thinking, what the whole world does, etc. Now, right at the beginning, St. Thomas asks whether, in question 1 in the Summa, he's arguing, is there need for another science? By that he means, is there need for philosophy? Other than theology, is there a need for philosophy? And he shows there is a need for philosophy. Or is it the other way around? Is he asking for theology? I'm a bit fuzzy on that at the moment. But you see, he's arguing, is there a need for theology? That's right, I'm sorry. Because he's saying this, that most people can't arrive at these concepts alone, can't arrive at a knowledge which is utterly necessary for us, like the 10 Commandments. Not everybody can think them through and say, well, this makes reason, that we ought to treat our neighbour as ourselves, etc. So, therefore, God revealed these things. Even though we can arrive at it with our own prime intellects, nevertheless, it's better for mankind and everybody has a right to this knowledge because everybody needs salvation. That's what St. Thomas' argument. I was delighted, by the way, to be in the Anglican Church in Canterbury in England, to wander through the cloisters there. It's because one of the showpieces for tourists, you see. And here I'm looking at something which I don't see even in Catholic churches. A window of St. Thomas Aquinas and a window of St. Augustine. And one of the men coming along, I said, he's saying, enjoying your tour or something like that, one of these Anglican clergymen, and he said, I said, yes, I'm delighted to see, what do you call it, a leaded, stained glass windows, couldn't think of the words, thank you. I said, I'm delighted to see, they're absolutely beautiful in the Canterbury Cathedral. And he said, oh yes, great men, weren't they? I said, you betcha they were great men. So, the Summa then is elaborated, and it works like this. A procession of God in all things. And this is all reasoned through scientifically as well as theologically. The two are present. Showing a procession of creatures from God. Angels, man, other creatures, right down to matter, as it were. And then the way to earn our salvation, and then the return to God. Men have called it a work of magnificence. Summa of theology, and as one person called it, and I mentioned this to Father Woodbury, he said he'd never heard that. Anybody say that? A summa of philosophy. 5 big volumes in Latin. And it's a procession of things from God, then the way of our lives, then the return to Him. Beautifully laid out. For instance, I think it's in the supplement, which is the last book. He talks about what education is. The making of a new man right up to the state of virtue. And then that's elaborated. So now, first question we have to face in this is whether it can be proved that there is a first cause. Many claim that it is impossible to prove that there is a God, for it seems an impossible task to prove the existence of an infinite being from the existence of finite beings. But what have they got in common, the things around us? Existence. The existence of, say, a tree, a dog, movement. And we'll see you've only got to have a movement of one little cloud, a wisp of cloud. From that you can prove the existence of God. It's not self-evident. To have self-evident knowledge, we would have to have already known God's essence. It's not evident from itself. That would make us superhuman beings. It's self-evident in itself for God, but not self-evident to us. Or as Dr. Pierce used to put it, either God exists or nothing else can exist. Now there are 5 ways of proving that there's a God, each of them the application of a mode of causality. Each way starts from an evident fact, which is a defect or a limitation in the natural order. Where did that comma come from there? I see corrections all the time as I'm writing it. They say that somebody who writes a work could go on editing forever in his own work. And that's why we always try to get at least 2 other scholars to read our papers before they're presented. And because the author doesn't always see his own mistakes. But each of these proofs, these ways, they're 5 ways rather than 5 proofs, because they're all proofs using causality. And here are the 5 limitations and things around us. They have to, this is on page 82. They have to be moved. They have to be caused. They have to be caused to exist. They have limited perfections. And they have to be moved towards their ends. Some men have asked, number 4 on that page, why is there something rather than nothing? Thus the question, is there a first cause of all being? And here are the answers. First of all, theism. Theos in Greek is the word for God. So theism, they accept the existence of God, or as people commonly say, believe in the existence of God. Atheism, they deny the existence of God. Agnosticism, without knowledge, we don't know. They don't know. They don't know if there's a God. And my experience shows that many of them are afraid to tackle the question. Pantheism means that all is God. Everything's God. There's only God existing. I'm looking at God here, I'm looking at God there, I'm looking at God here. All is God. Anthropomorphism, man-shaped. We see God as something like ourselves. Now, what would you say St. Thomas Aquinas, the prime philosopher, what would you say, where does he fit in here? He's closer to agnosticism than anthropomorphism. He knows the infinite being of God, and consequently, he's more like an agnostic than he is like an anthropomorphist. He's certainly not a pantheist, and certainly not an atheist. Yes, he is a theist. Now, number 5, current atheism. I am more disturbed about that than most other things today, because everything goes back to that. Is there a God? Atheists say there's no God. One lovely young woman in my class, one of my classes, said to me some years ago, I'm an atheist myself. I thought, you poor little dear, you wouldn't know how to spell the damn word, let alone call you what it means. It was later she said, oh, Dr. Waters, I want you to meet my fiancée. We live at such and such. Yeah, they're shacked up together. That's a consequence. And you expect that. I was not surprised to hear that. So atheism is becoming official today. We thought the Soviet Union was bad enough, and they had terrible troubles putting it out of students' minds. I learned, for instance, that in the big university in Moscow, I've forgotten what it was called again, but they were complaining when the students were studying Marxism, they had terrible trouble getting into the students' minds to deny the principle of non-contradiction. Being cannot be and is not at the same time. You cannot say a being is and a not is at the same time. That's absurd. That's the fundamental principle. Look on the sheets that you've got on the principles. If some newcomers haven't got that, please let me know. Those 2 pages. They're all fundamental principles laid out. By the way, I've never seen a work like that. Nowhere. Yet they're most valuable to have sheets like that. So they had trouble because Marx denied the principle of contradiction, or the principle of non-contradiction as it should be called. See, there's 2 contradictions, is not. You can't say an apple tree is and an apple tree is not at the same time, at the same aspect, or in the same respect, if you like. And they had terrible trouble getting the students' minds to deny, to accept the denial of this. Why? Because our minds are made for the truth. We cannot think that being is non-being. And they had to try and convince the students of that, to fit in with Marxism. That's another story. But it's so widespread today. And the ACLU, what's it stand for? Anti-American Civil Liberties Union. They make an assumption. I wonder if any of them, if they sat down and eyeball to eyeball discussed this topic with you. I attended an atheist debate with a Christian in Buffalo one evening. I've never forgotten it. I sent, by the way, a review of that debate to the Western New York Catholic. It was ignored. You know what Catholic newspapers are like? You know, big news. Catholic horse eats Catholic grass in Catholic convent. So, but that night I heard nothing but nonsense. They argue and argue. Why don't donkeys talk and snakes talk today? I thought I heard a couple of snakes talking, frankly, but at least one. The other poor fellow, I felt sorry for him. He's a Presbyterian chosen by his minister, who's a retired lawyer, when he goes to debate. And he said, I've never debated before, and I thought that's quite evident. The other man, who was a pure atheist, but wasn't honest enough to just put it that way. I'm a humanist who happens to be, note, an atheist. Oh, the sneeze. Oh, that was funny. I went, like that, just the sneeze got away. Somebody said, God bless you. Then I sneezed again and they said it, bless you again. I nearly fell off my seat. That's an atheist at the centre of inquiry, an atheist debate. Yeah, I've never forgotten that. I mentioned that in the article. I found it the other day to the Western New York Catholic. Just ignore it. So this one priest, and I meant to dig this out, wrote a book. He's something like an existential psychologist. He's a priest. He was a psychologist and has become or rational psychologist, I think. And he said there are 6 reasons why people become atheists. And frankly, Yeah, I think he left some out. I think he exaggerated some. In any case, that's neither here nor there. But certainly, two reasons for the widespread occurrence of atheism today. And St. Thomas saw this. And these are his two objections. You see, in all his works, St. Thomas puts, first of all, the objections. Then he puts a statement. Then he puts his own teaching. Then he puts replies to the objections. And this always begins in Latin with ad. And books will put that in to save writing replies to the objections. But the objections, some, or possibly 50 years ago, I understand, in the United States, somebody set up two objections against the existence of God. It took a while apparently for people here to discover this. They were just the objections of St. Thomas. He himself sets up. So somebody suddenly tumbled to it. Why? I don't know. It should have been obvious. And then they just submitted St. Thomas's replies to it. Little a, the existence of evil and the anguish of man. There's the first objection St. Thomas raises. Gott ist mit uns. God may not be a good God, at least, some think. He may exist, but not a good God. That's more logical than to say, because of evil, therefore he doesn't exist. Then the second one is the explanations of science, which seem adequate to explain the whole of reality. Oh, I laugh when I hear that. This gives men a chance to be utter materialists, rather. Thank you. I mean, they're plain silly to say that science explains everything. Look, these are a couple of the utterances I've heard from scientists. Once there was nothing, then from sheer necessity things burst into existence. Fancy a physicist calling himself a physicist and setting that up. From utter necessity, nothing burst into something. The greater came out of the lesser. Something came out of nothing that didn't have anything. Oh boy. The explanations of science, which seem adequate to explain the whole of reality. We can't even make any living substance, and men have been trying that for years. What do they say? You take ammonium carbonate and boil it up, and it turns into urea. And urea is found in things, found in human substance. Therefore, that must be living substance. Childish. Look at that surgeon that said he'd operated on people that for many years and he'd never found a soul yet. That's childish. I said I'd have been surprised if you said you did find a soul. So, my friends, we're going to examine this. Gives them, as I said, a chance to be utter materialists, provided they don't think. But the fact of theism must also be faced. Men believe in God, few try to prove that he exists. These are mostly philosophers. I wasn't accusing you there, I say they are mostly philosophers. So, my friend, what has been produced here, by the way, is after the problem I had this week with the computer. So if there are any mistakes, you can understand it. I was tried to the limit. So, belief in the existence of many gods came with the breakdown of civilizations. Right from the dawn of civilization, everything we know shows that men have always accepted the existence of God. I was in the caves of Lascaux in the south of France. They're closed now, nobody's allowed to go in for many years. And it was an absolute dream to go in there. I've been in the Jenolan caves, the Wombian caves, the Mammoth caves here, but when I walked into the caves of Lascaux, my mouth dropped open. Under modern lighting, there are 3 levels, probably 1,000 years apart at least, 3 levels covered by calcite, and prehistoric men painted magnificent paintings, then calcite covered. They only had the lighting from torches, of course. Then men painted again, then later calcite, then men painted again. I remember when these were discovered. 2 kids playing with a ball. The ball went down into a hole. And kid said it's down there, like, oh, he had a flashlight and he could see it. So he went down in the hole. I wouldn't do that in Australia because of snakes. This was in France, by the way. I'm sorry, should have mentioned that. In France, and the south of France. And they went to, when he got down there, flashlight around, he said, my God, what did he discover? The caves of Lascaux. When you walk into them, you walk in through rock, say the other side of where the lad discovered it. When you walk in, the first thing that hits you is this modern lighting. Magnificent painting of a big bull on the run. I've got pictures, and I've also got a replica. I don't know whether I've got it here or in Australia, my sister's garage, where it is, but I've got this beautiful, made out of the local cement materials, and just as if it's inside the cave, magnificent thing. I don't know where that is. Anyway, these men, they think it was for religious reasons that this was all painting. Archaeologists have come to that conclusion. But there's always men's attempt to prove, or few have tried to prove they exist. These are mostly philosophers. But the belief in the existence of many gods came with the breakdown of civilizations, or at least with the decay of their culture. When I was about 21, 22, I was confronted in the Sydney domain where we have people on platforms speaking on Sunday afternoon all over this. You can only get that kind of thing in the kind of climate we've got. You get a nurse there dressed in beautiful scarlet hood and nursing thing which they wear in Australia or used to. And she'd lecture on we eat too many carbohydrates. Before you know where you are, poof, you've gone with the wind, she'd say. That's what happens from eating too many carbohydrates. Well, there were Catholic speakers, the Catholic Evidence Guild. There are communist speakers, and you see always a couple of men in suits there making notes. These are from the, the security department, etc. And so I got cornered by about 5 communists one day when I was only a boy. They saw me wearing a Holy Name Society badge, and they call it the Mickey Mouse badge. And they wanted to corner me, and they thought they had a boy at their command, you see. So they kept talking to me, and I found us a little bit cheeky. I gave back a bit. I had a cousin with me, by the way, and they thought they had me there at their mercy, but they found they had a tiger by the tail because I was furious with them. And they told me that the only reason men have a God now is they've kicked out all these other gods and they're breaking down to have one God. History shows it's just the opposite. The original was always monotheism, one God. All nations accepted one God. And the only reason that they've got many gods is with the decay, for instance, in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, the decay of the culture of that nation. And men would invent gods for their own advantage or something like that. Like the Caesars, they thought they were gods, the emperors of Rome. But the fact of theism must also be faced. As I said, down in Terra del Fuego, for instance, they had a god. Men for a long time thought they didn't because they didn't talk about it, because they regarded it as a private matter. But many men traced their objection, particularly philosophers, since the decay of the greatness of medieval philosophy. Say in the 14th century they start to go into nominalism, and later on men start to go into dilettantism, nice pleasures of literary stuff and plays and things, and ignore the great fundamental problems of humankind. And since that, the breakdown, when men like Descartes, pretending to know the medieval period and didn't really, remember what Walsh says, 13th was the greatest of centuries. We can learn an enormous amount of lessons in that. But since then, men have not faced the great truths, the great proofs of the medieval period. Bonaventure, Augustine, all tried to prove the existence of God. Bonaventure was a good friend of St. Thomas Aquinas. So what we've got to do now is ourselves, we're running out of time, we have to start on the proofs in general, and we're going to get right into it next class. Also, by then, I will send you some more pages. I'm going to look at the first way, examine it thoroughly, and we can discuss it. then I'm going to show you the 5 ways together, a sort of a perspective of the 5 ways, to make it easy for your minds to see the first way is exactly dealt with in the other 4 ways. But we'll then deal with the other 4 ways in particular. And I can assure you, you're going to feel the same exhilaration as I felt when I first studied this, first saw. It took years for me to suddenly grasp, and Dr. Bonnet, whose doctoral thesis was on this, by the way, expressed it beautifully to me. It was this morning, wasn't it? Evening, was it? Sometime today, anyway. You see, he lives at Youngstown, so that's probably morning there, it's afternoon here. Look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you.